Welcome to the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast, a conversation designed to help leaders go further faster. On today's podcast, we'll begin a 2-month conversation about some of the lessons we've learned in our first 20 years. Andy, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to believe it's been 20 years.
Yeah, October 1995, we became an organization, and off we went. Just celebrated our 20th with some friends and family yesterday, and it's like a blink.
It is. And you know, I'm really looking forward to these podcasts because we're going to dig into just a few of the things that I think we've learned.
The thing that'll make these two podcasts unique is that we're not saying, here's some things we think everybody should do. What we're going to talk about are the things that we actually did that actually made a difference. And one of the challenges in leadership literature is, you read the books, you read the articles, you underline them, you hand them out to your team, you discuss them for months, and you wonder, is this important? I mean, it all seems important. Anybody that
in theory, this should work.
Yeah, a compelling writer can make anything sound important. And you think, oh my gosh, if we don't embrace this principle, or maybe this really is the solution. And so we talk about those kinds of things, and there's value in all that. So for these next two podcasts, Lane and I are going to take the things that actually made a difference and talk about those. In other words, knowing what we know now, if we were to go back 20 years and start over, of all the things we read, of all the things that we thought were important, of all the things that we taught our staff, what are the handful of things that, wow, we know from our experience, these things really made a difference. We read some great stuff. We heard some great stuff. We tried some great stuff. Some stuff came and went, lost sight of it. Oh, yeah, remember when we read that? We never did anything with it. But these are the really 4 or 5 things that we read, none of this is original with us probably, that we implemented that really made a significant difference. So I think these are going to be 2 very helpful podcasts.
All right, let's get started now. These aren't necessarily in order of importance.
No, and I'm glad you said that, because I want to talk about the most important one at the very end, which will be at the end of next month's podcast.
Okay. Well, we're going to start with this one, and it is that you have to have a uniquely better product or idea.
Yeah, and this is something we never talk about on our podcast specifically because we're in a nonprofit. We create churches, so the whole idea of a product or idea. But looking back, part of our success, or a big part of our success, is we had what I call a uniquely better product, or in our case, idea. And here's what I mean by that. Not unique in, what is that or what does that do? Remember the first time you saw a Segway? A Segway wasn't a version of something. It was just a Segway.
It was a new thing.
It's like, what is that? So a Segway certainly falls within the category of what I'm talking about. But when I say unique and better, it's essentially a unique approach to something that already exists, a category that perhaps already exists, that's also better. And again, when I say unique, I mean somebody sees it and they say, I know what that is and I know what that does, but that's unique. That seems to be a better one of those. Better is, again, it does what it's supposed to do, but it does it better than the competition. I remember the first time a Cutco knife salesman came to our house. I'm sure some of our listeners are familiar with Cutco knives. And we already had knives. I mean, we didn't need knives. In fact, we didn't even use the knives we had. But here's this college kid, and he was a friend of a friend, and he came in and did the display. But when this kid pulled out the scissors and cut the edge off a penny, I was sold. Now, again, I knew what scissors did. We already had scissors, but that was unique and that was better. And I'm sure every man in America who has seen this demonstration is like, honey, we're buying those knives. I want scissors that can cut through a penny. So again, when you think about a product, whether it's a product or an idea, there has to be something unique and it has to be perceived as better. And again, when you talk about nonprofit world or church, that may sound funny, but when I look back and think about our success, we brought something to our community that was uniquely better.
Right. Well, I appreciate that kid coming to your house. I think I got Cutco knives for Christmas that year.
We've been sending Cutco knives to people ever since. So, yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, when you think then about our history, what is it in your mind that made it a uniquely better product or idea?
Our product was an engaging church experience that engaged the entire family. It was an engaging church experience that engaged the entire family, especially men. Now, again, everybody knew what a church was, and everybody already had assumptions about church. Again, hey, it's a pair of scissors. Hey, it's a set of knives. I know what a bicycle does. Everybody knows what a church does, but we had a uniquely great church because we created a uniquely great experience for the entire family. So it stood out. And again, whatever the product is, whatever the organization is, if you ask me, hey, what's important looking back, you've got to start with something that's a standout product or a standout idea.
Andy, you've said in the past, when we first got started, when you have the only hot dog stand in town, you don't even have to have that good a hot dog.
Yeah, and in the early days, our product, our idea was unique, and it was uniquely better. I mean, people who want to go to church are looking for the best church for their family. So in the early days, it was unique. It stood out. It wasn't a segue. It wasn't a what is that? It wasn't a category buster. It was just a new and improved version of a local church.
Andy, I think this concept of being unique is reflected in a question that we ask a lot, and that is, if your idea or your product ceased to exist, what would be missed? Who would miss you?
Yeah, and this is a really important question because if you're listening today and you work in a company, an older company or a company that's developing products, or you've been doing the same thing over and over and over, regardless, I think it's always an important question to ask. If suddenly our product or if our company or if our franchise or whatever your context is, if it suddenly ceased to exist, what would be missed and who would miss you? What would be missed if you're doing a what that a whole lot of other people are doing? What about your particular company or your particular product disappearing? What specifically would be missed? And who would miss you? In other words, there's a customer base that would suddenly have to go and use somebody else's product. What would what would be missed, and who would miss you? Because our answers to those questions point to our unique contribution to our space, or our lack of a unique contribution to our space. If nobody would miss your product, or nobody would miss your business or your franchise or your location, that tells you something. But if you can answer the question, well, I'll tell you what would be missed in this space, or I'll tell you who would miss us, then that gives us the opportunity to narrow the focus to what we really need to focus on and who we need to focus on, because essentially that's not just a customer base, that really points to our uniqueness in that particular space. So we ask that question early on, and we ask that question all the time. There's lots of churches in the areas where we plant churches, and in our case, there are a lot of churches that are doing exactly what we do, essentially the way we do it, who are very open-handed and say, and we learned it from you. And in our case, that's fine. Local churches generally don't compete in the way that they used to in terms of, style and all that sort of thing. So that's a win for us. But at the same time, we have to continue to ask the question, okay, so there's another dozen churches essentially doing what we do the way we do it. But if we were to disappear, would anything be missing? And if not, that should bother us. And if so, what does that say about what we need to continue to focus on to continue to be unique and better?
So then your uniqueness then is really your marketing leverage.
Yeah, going forward, and we didn't know that. Again, when we started that, this wasn't even about marketing something. Looking back, we had a unique offering that marketed itself. We were the only one in town. If this is what you were looking for, we were the only one. But going forward now that there's other people doing what we do, just like in the marketplace, there are very few unique products. There are versions of things that everyone knows about. Yeah. A way to discover marketing leverage is to ask those questions. What would be missing? Who would miss us? So essentially, 20 years ago, we created enjoyable, helpful church experiences, and that was our unique contribution, not to a new category or even a new product, but basically a 2,000-year-old product. This was our unique contribution to something that's been around for a long, long time. So the point of all this is, again, if you said, hey, what's a handful of things that you would do again based on 20 years of experience, I would say, wow, we lucked out, or we stumbled upon a unique approach to something that's been around for a long time, and we leveraged the heck out of it. And that was a big part of our success and continues to be.
So, Andy, what would you say to a listener who, if they ask that question, isn't sure what would be missed or if anybody would even miss them?
Well, if this is somebody who's considering a launch of a company or franchise or something new to an area, then I would say wait. In other words, if again, as a leader, if I'm not sure what I'm bringing to the marketplace that's unique, I guarantee you nobody else is. If it's a little bit unclear to me, it's going to be really unclear to everybody else.
Well, that leads us to the second idea for this podcast, and that's really the only way to keep it uniquely better is to have a culture of continual improvement.
Yeah, again, looking back, if you were to say, hey, based on what you know now, what would you do again? This is huge. And again, all of these ideas came from books, things we read, things that we brought from prior experiences. Again, did we know how important this was at the time? No. Would we emphasize this again? Absolutely. From the very beginning, we have always asked the question, how do we make it better? How do we make it better? And on this podcast, we've talked about that. That's one of our staff behaviors. We have 6 staff behaviors, and one of them is make it better. We want everybody looking for opportunities to make it better. And what that did for us and what that does for any organization, it creates, as you said, a culture of continual improvement. And when it becomes part of a culture, things that would normally create tension in an organization don't create tension because we're constantly saying, hey, it's your business to put your nose in my business, and it's my business to stick my nose in your business because I want you to be better and you want me to be better. And as everybody knows, if we all get better, we all get better. There's a cumulative effect to everybody getting better. But, tearing down the parts of silos that become obstacles to collaboration, and not just collaboration like let me help you, but hey, I noticed something. Is it okay if I tell you what I've noticed? From day one, we've done that. Now, it was easy for us day one because there were 6 of us, and we were all friends, and we all had this deep abiding sense that we don't know what we're doing, but we think it's important. So I really do think that trickle-down approach to learning and that trickle-down approach to accountability, it just became part of our culture. But I think anybody can create that kind of culture. And again, we've talked about that before. But again, if you said, hey, based on what you know now, what would you make sure you did again? I would press hard into this whole idea of a culture of continual improvement. And one of the obstacles that we had in our industry is we're in the church industry. And there is resistance to change in church. Always, always, always. It's the nature of what we do. We're talking about an unchangeable God. We deal with unchangeable text. We deal with ancient traditions. And, you begin messing with those things, and it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like you're messing with something sacred. So every industry, every company has obstacles to change. We do as well, and ours are unique. But from day one, we decided, no, we're going to decide what's unchangeable, and then we are going to be open to changing everything else because improvement requires change. And if there's obstacles to change, there's obstacles to improvement. And one day you wake up and you don't have a better product and you don't have anything unique to offer your community.
Andy, as you said, this was a lot easier when there were 6 of us in a room. We held each other accountable. As you said, we were friends. We knew each other. How has this been sustained over 20 years and now several hundred people involved?
Yeah, several hundred people in various locations.
Right.
Well, you have to formalize it. And one of the things we've talked about before is this rhythm that we've created organizationally of orchestrating and evaluating, orchestrating and evaluating. Orchestrating answers the question, how do we do it here? We stole that from Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth Revisited, or The E-Myth. Orchestration answers the question, how do we do it here? And this is how we do it here until further notified. This allows us to create predictable experiences. When you walk into your favorite restaurant, you don't mind some changes on the menu, but you want it to feel like it felt last time you were there. So there has to be that. But at the same time, if you do that forever, then you never change, you never grow. So it's orchestrate and evaluate. You document how we do it here, and then you're constantly evaluating. So we really have, because of this commitment to make it better, that is a rhythm that we're in all the time. And again, if you were to say to me, Andy, you can only take 4 or 5 things back into the past and build the entire organization around these 4 or 5 things, this would definitely be one, a culture of continual improvement.
And really the byproduct of that continual improvement is momentum.
Yeah. In fact, the definition of momentum is new, improved, and improving. Anything that's new creates momentum. It can be bad momentum, and it won't be sustained momentum. But anything that's new attracts attention. But improved means I can't make it new again, but I can improve it to where it attracts attention again. And improving means we are committed to this forever. There is no perfect product. There's no perfect environment. There's no perfect anything that's going to stay perfect for very long. Every great idea has a shelf life. Every great product has a shelf life. Every technology has a shelf life. So new, improved, and improving is how you take a new thing and create and sustain momentum. But again, all of that is within the context of an organization that is committed to continual improvement. Along the same lines, Lane, I've heard you, when you've done training, say that if it's worth doing, it's worth evaluating. I think that's a great statement because we don't do anything that we don't think is worth doing, but we all, nobody loves to be evaluated.
Right.
I mean, I don't like to do evaluations one-on-one. I don't like to be evaluated. I don't want my messages to be evaluated, but I'm never going to get any better.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea, and it certainly is a statement that supports the idea of continual improvement. If it's worth doing, it's worth evaluating.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like both of us heard Howard Hendricks teach us in grad school that practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent, but that it's evaluated experience that makes us better.
Yep.
So the importance of a culture of continual improvement.
And experience just creates a rut.
Exactly. Andy, there's an analogy that just permeates our organization about what happens if you don't have this culture of continual improvement. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, the imagery we've used, or the visual we've used, is an ugly old couch that everybody listening can remember growing up. Your family bought a couch, and they spent forever trying to pick the perfect couch for that room, and it was great, and they got it. It was the right fabric, and everybody loved it. And then everybody fell in love with it. And every time they moved, they took that couch. And there was sentimental value. There was, we nursed our children here. It just goes on and on and on. And guests walk in the house and they think, "What is up with that couch? It's just ugly." And then we move it to the basement. We just can't get rid of it. Well, that everything about every organization has that same potential, especially when you created it. When you create something, you love it. You're in love with it, and everything works for a while. So we're constantly asking the question, where are the old couches? Where are the things that we've gotten so accustomed to seeing? What are the habits or the practices we are so accustomed to doing? We don't even see them anymore, because that's what happens with ugly furniture in a house. The person that lives there does not see it. And we've all walked into retail environments. We've all gone to fast food restaurants. We've all gone to high-end restaurants where there's habitually weird stuff, and you think, they don't see it. If they saw it, they would change it. But they've been here so long, they've been doing this for so long, they've been selling this for so long, they just don't see it. So continual improvement means there has to be a context where you can have conversations about those ugly couches, which means you got to bring in people from the outside. You've got to leverage the fresh eyes of new employees.
Right.
So again, all those things are just part, and we've talked about some of these things before, about continual improvement and being intentional. Because if you're not intentional, it doesn't change, and what was unique and what was better becomes standard, and the world moves on without you.
Andy, I think that the most difficult aspect of a culture of continual improvement is when it gets personal.
Yeah, because each of us have to continually improve as leaders. It's easy to sit in a meeting and talk about a product. It's easy to sit in a meeting and talk about a process. It's easy to sit in a meeting and talk about, in our case, an environment or evaluating an environment. But if the organization is going to get better, the people in the organization have to get better. And that happens at two levels. There's skill sets that have to be improved, especially in the area of technology that's changing constantly. But everybody who brings a skill to their job description must improve with their skill set, or the organization doesn't improve. And then, and this sounds terrible, people can become that ugly old couch. Well, she's always done that. He's always done that. Well, he was here from the beginning. Well, she played a critical role 10 years ago. We're just so grateful we keep her around. And that's dishonoring to people. It feels like we're being sensitive, but it's dishonoring. But the way around that is to create, as part of a culture of a continual improvement, creating opportunities for the people in the organization to continually improve as well. And there are things that organizations do and can do systematically, but at the end of the day, Lane, and we know this, it really comes down to each individual deciding, am I willing to do what I need to do to get better at what I do so the organization can be better? So a couple of weeks ago, I asked my assistant, Diane, to sign me up for another 360 evaluation. I'd rather go to the dentist 4 times. Who wants to do that? But we've been doing this 20 years, and I lead probably the way I did 20 years ago. I've learned some things. My personality isn't going to change. My style isn't going to change. But for me not to be willing to grow as a leader says something to everybody else in the organization, and it sets our organization up to be one of those organizations that used to be unique and used to be better back in the day. And nobody wants to work in a company like that. Nobody wants to be, a leadership position in a company like that. So this begins with, looking in the mirror and saying, hey, as we make everything else better, how do I make me better?
Well, Andy, I think that's a great place to stop in this first installment of things that we've learned in our first 20 years. And thanks for your time today. And I want to say thanks to our listeners and for joining us as well. To hear more from Andy on leadership, please visit andystanley.com.